The esophagus has one main job: move food from your mouth to your stomach. It's a simple, highly elastic muscular tube. Within the gastrointestinal tract, cancer here is relatively rare, accounting for only 7% of malignancies. But its anatomical location and the way it develops present a difficult clinical picture. The difficulty begins with how quietly the disease starts. Long before any alarms go off, a patient might notice a vague sense of indigestion, a mild discomfort behind the breastbone, or perhaps slow, hidden blood loss resulting in mild anemia. Eventually, these quiet signals give way to the disease's hallmark symptom: progressive dysphagia. At first, swallowing solid foods becomes difficult. Over time, that internal obstruction tightens until even liquids, and eventually a person's own saliva, cannot pass. What makes this disease particularly difficult to pin down right now is that its biological profile is shifting. The frequency of different cell types and where they appear is no longer following historical patterns. Because the cancer's behavior, triggers, and survival rates change depending on where the tumor originates, we have to map the disease anatomically. By descending through the esophagus from top to bottom, we can see exactly how this threat forms and how it spreads. Looking first at the upper and middle sections of the tube, we find the traditional stronghold of the disease. Historically, over 95% of all esophageal cancers occurred right here, taking the form of squamous cell carcinoma. This specific cellular mutation is heavily tied to age and lifestyle. The majority of patients are between 45 and 75, with a sharp spike in risk linked directly to heavy tobacco use and excessive alcohol consumption. But there is also a striking geographic cluster. Incidence rates for squamous cell carcinoma spike across a distinct belt of the globe, stretching from the shores of the Caspian Sea across to northern China. In these specific areas, the triggers are largely environmental. Agricultural practices can lead to the fungal contamination of food stores, producing carcinogenic toxins. When these are combined with regional nutritional deficiencies, the local risk increases. Beyond diet and habits, structural issues can also create an opening. A condition called achalasia causes the esophagus to severely dilate and lose its ability to push food downward. Patients with this condition face a 10-fold increase in squamous cell cancer, often developing tumors at a much younger age. While tumors in the upper regions are tied to specific environments and habits, we find a different landscape as we reach the base of the organ. Moving down to the lowest third of the esophagus, just above the entrance to the stomach, we hit a different biological landscape. Here, the dominant pathology is adenocarcinoma. This chart tracks the progression in the lower esophagus. In several countries, adenocarcinoma now accounts for 60 to 75% of cases, with its incidence growing by 8% every year. This data follows the rise of chronic acid reflux. As stomach acid repeatedly burns the lower esophagus, the persistent inflammation causes the normal tissue to change. It can develop into Barrett's esophagus, where the lining is replaced by tissue similar to the stomach or intestines. Regardless of the cell type, this organ is poorly equipped to contain them. The cancer spreads locally by burrowing horizontally beneath the top layer of healthy tissue, extending up to 3.5 centimeters out from the visible tumor site. It also uses the body's drainage system to leapfrog across the region. Through discontinuous lymphatic permeation, malignant cells can skip the local lymph nodes entirely, bypassing them to seed satellite growths further away from the main tumor. By tunneling invisibly under the mucosal surface and skipping the body's local alarms, the carcinoma establishes a sprawling network long before the physical act of swallowing ever becomes difficult. Because the cancer weaponizes the body's drainage pathways, the exact physical location of the tumor effectively dictates a patient's treatment options and survival chances. Tumors in the upper third drain into a widespread network of glands in the neck. Because this area is crowded with vital structures, like the trachea and major blood vessels, radical surgery is often impossible. Instead, these growths are frequently treated with radiotherapy. In the middle third, the lymph fluid drains into the hilum of the lungs and the subcarinal glands. Removing a tumor here presents surgical challenges, where the roles of surgery and radiotherapy are still being defined. The lowest third offers the clearest path for surgical intervention. Because it drains into the glands around the stomach and spleen, surgeons can perform an en-bloc resection, removing the lower esophagus along with the adjacent stomach, spleen, and omenta. The disease rarely spreads through the bloodstream until late in its progression. Instead, it usually kills through local invasion of the surrounding anatomy. Signs like hoarseness caused by nerve palsy or swollen glands in the neck indicate the cancer has reached the trachea, aorta, or diaphragm. Esophageal carcinoma is a highly effective opportunist. Driven by shifting lifestyle factors and internal biology, it uses the physical layout of the esophagus to hide and branch out. Tracking exactly where this cancer lives is the only reliable way we have to intercept it. Here is a tumor at the gastroesophageal junction. Above is the esophagus, a transit tube. Below is the stomach, a holding tank. Surgeons cannot simply remove the diseased section and leave a gap. They must detach the stomach and pull it into the chest cavity. Traditionally, this procedure required highly invasive surgery, opening the patient with large incisions across both the chest and the abdomen. Today, a modern approach achieves this using a robotic platform that operates through 4 or 5 small incisions in the belly. Executing this complex anatomical replumbing through minimally invasive ports reduces physical trauma. Patients often bypass the ICU entirely, recovering fast enough to begin life-saving systemic therapies much sooner. Moving the stomach out of the abdomen presents a strict biological limit. Tissue dies without blood flow. This vascular map isolates 2 major supply lines, the left gastric artery and the gastroepiploic arch on the right. To mobilize the stomach, the left gastric artery and smaller surrounding vessels must be severed. The entire organ now relies entirely on the gastroepiploic arch, which remained intact and pulsing to keep the stomach tissue alive during its relocation. But detaching the stomach introduces a neurological problem. Resecting the esophagus cuts the vagus nerve. Without this nerve, the brain can no longer send signals telling the stomach to empty its contents. To counter this, surgeons perform a pyloromyotomy. They cut into the pyloric sphincter, the exit valve at the base of the stomach, permanently widening the opening. Widening this lower valve changes how the stomach operates. With the nerve signals gone, the organ relies entirely on the sheer force of gravity to ensure food continues moving into the intestines without getting trapped. We now look at a transparent view of the chest cavity. Surgeons enter through the right side of the chest to free the thoracic esophagus. This specific path keeps instruments safely away from the heart and the major blood vessels grouped on the left. Once the esophagus is free, the massive physical relocation begins. The mobilized stomach slides up through the diaphragm, filling the chest cavity, and is pulled all the way out to a small incision in the right side of the neck. With the stomach now residing in the chest and neck, and the vagus nerves completely severed, what force pushes food down this new conduit? As established in the abdominal stage, gravity is now the sole engine for digestion. The widened pyloric valve ensures food drops steadily downward. This cross-section shows the final anatomical connection, or anastomosis. The top of the stomach is permanently sealed to the remaining cervical esophagus using 2 precise layers, an inner row of vertical mattress sutures with the knots tied on the inside, and an outer continuous layer to secure the junction. Executing this final connection high up in the neck is a specific risk reduction strategy. It keeps the delicate suture line out of the chest cavity, avoiding the danger of a life-threatening leak near the heart and lungs. Here is a side-by-side look at the body's new anatomy. On the left, the original stomach expands as a holding tank. On the right, the surgically relocated stomach is stretched tight, acting as a rigid, narrow pipe. Because this pipe lacks holding capacity, food drops too quickly into the lower intestines. This rapid emptying triggers dumping syndrome, leading to sudden weakness, sweating, and severe fatigue immediately after eating. This infographic outlines the first rule to manage this physical change: transition to 5 small meals a day. By replacing heavy plates with smaller, high-protein and low-sugar portions, patients regulate the physical load entering the intestines. We see the second rule here: sleep elevated at a 30-degree angle. Because the upper esophageal valve is gone, patients must use gravity as a mechanical shield to prevent severe reflux during the night. Finally, Rule 3 dictates a strict 1-hour fasting window before bedtime. This guarantees the narrow conduit is completely empty before the patient lies down. By treating the digestive tract as a mechanical system with new parameters, patients adapt to their relocated anatomy. Mastering these physical rules turns a complex surgical reconstruction into an active and manageable daily life.